The ballroom was the kind of place where everything cost more than it should. The chandeliers hanging from the ceiling probably cost more than most people make in a year. The carpet was so thick and soft that you couldn't hear footsteps. Even the air smelled expensive, like a mix of fresh flowers and perfume that came in bottles with French names. Rebecca Chen had been working at the Grand Meridian Hotel for almost 3 years now. She knew every corner of this place. She knew which tiles in the kitchen were slightly loose. She knew that the ice machine on the 3rd floor made a weird grinding sound at exactly 2 p.m. She knew how to carry 4 plates at once without making it look hard, and she knew how to smile at guests who never smiled back. Tonight was just another Saturday night gala. Well, not just another one. This was the spring charity ball. One of those events where tickets cost $1,000 and people wore jewelry that needed its own security guard. Rebecca had worked plenty of these fancy events before. They all kind of blurred together after a while. Rich people in expensive clothes, eating tiny portions of food that took chefs hours to prepare, drinking wine that cost more per bottle than her weekly paycheck. She moved between the tables like a ghost. That's what it felt like sometimes, like she was invisible. Guests would have entire conversations right in front of her, talking about their vacation homes and their kids' private schools, never once looking at her face. She'd refill their water glasses, clear their plates, bring them fresh napkins, and it was like she wasn't even there. The other servers felt it too. During their break, huddled in the cramped staff room in the back, they'd joke about it. Tommy, who'd been working there for 5 years, called it the invisible force field. He said the richer the guest, the thicker the force field. They'd laugh about it, but it stung a little bit every time. Tonight's event was for some arts foundation. Rebecca didn't know all the details. Something about funding music programs for schools. There were posters everywhere with pictures of kids holding violins and trumpets. The irony wasn't lost on her, but she pushed the thought away. That was a different life. A different version of herself that she'd packed away in a box and shoved to the back of a mental closet. The guests started arriving at 6. They came in couples and small groups. The women in long gowns that probably cost more than Rebecca's car. The men in tuxedos that actually fit properly, not like the rental ones you see at most weddings. They handed their coats to the coat check girl, accepted glasses of champagne from servers in the lobby, and drifted into the ballroom like they owned the place. Which in a way, some of them probably did. Rebecca's section was near the stage, which meant she had a clear view of the grand piano sitting there like a piece of art. It was a Steinway, black and shiny, probably worth more than she'd make in 10 years of serving tables. She tried not to look at it. She'd gotten good at not looking at pianos over the years. The evening coordinator was a woman named Patricia, who wore a headset and carried a clipboard like it was a weapon. She was the kind of person who probably made lists of her lists. Everything had to be perfect. Every napkin folded just right. Every wine glass positioned at the exact correct angle. She'd been racing around all afternoon, checking and double-checking every detail. Rebecca was refilling bread baskets when she heard Patricia's voice getting louder near the kitchen doors. Something was wrong. You could always tell when something was wrong at these events. The staff would get tense, their movements would get quicker, and the fake smiles would get a little more fixed. "What do you mean, delayed?" Patricia was saying into her phone, her voice tight. "The event starts in 20 minutes. He was supposed to be here an hour ago." Rebecca glanced over while pretending to arrange the bread in her basket. Patricia's face was getting red, which was never a good sign. "Find someone else, then. I don't care who. Call every pianist in the city if you have to." Patricia hung up and immediately started dialing another number. The other servers were starting to notice too. In the kitchen, word spread fast. The pianist wasn't coming. Or he was coming, but late. Really late. His flight got delayed or canceled or something. The details kept changing every time the story got passed along, but the important part stayed the same. There was supposed to be live piano music during the silent auction, and there was no one to play. Rebecca watched Patricia make call after call. Each one seemed to go worse than the last. Every pianist in the city was apparently either already booked out of town or asking for an amount of money that made even Patricia's eyes widen. The guests didn't know anything was wrong yet. They were settling into their seats, chatting and laughing, completely unaware that behind the scenes there was a small crisis unfolding. The silent auction was supposed to start in 40 minutes. People would be walking around looking at the items up for bid, and there was supposed to be elegant piano music floating through the air. That was the whole atmosphere they'd promised. Rebecca brought out another tray of appetizers, tiny pieces of something on tiny pieces of bread. She offered them to a table of older women dripping in diamonds. They took them without looking at her, without saying thank you, and continued their conversation about someone's daughter's wedding in the Hamptons. Back in the kitchen, Patricia was now offering triple the normal fee. Rebecca could hear her through the door. Triple? Yes, triple the usual rate. You can't? Can you recommend anyone? There was a pause. They're all booked too? The head chef was starting to worry. He kept looking at the clock. The silent auction display was already set up in the side room. Paintings, jewelry, vacation packages, all arranged on tables with little cards describing them. People would start wandering in there soon, and if there was just silence, just the sound of footsteps and whispered conversations, it would feel wrong. It would feel cheap, even though nothing about this event was cheap. Rebecca set down her empty tray and picked up a new one, this one loaded with champagne glasses. Her hands were steady. They were always steady when she was working. Years of practice had taught her how to move smoothly, how to balance, how to make it all look effortless even when her feet were killing her and she'd rather be anywhere else. She walked past the piano again. It sat there on the small stage, waiting. The lid was open, ready for someone to sit down and fill the room with music. The bench was positioned perfectly. Someone had even put out sheet music, though Rebecca doubted any professional pianist actually needed it for the kind of background music you played at these events. Her fingers tingled slightly. She ignored it. That was a feeling from another life, from another version of herself that didn't exist anymore. That girl who'd spent hours at a piano bench, whose fingers would dance across the keys until her mother would have to drag her away to do homework or eat dinner. That was gone. Patricia's voice cut through the ambient noise of the party. She wasn't even trying to be quiet anymore. I understand it's last minute. That's exactly why I'm offering so much. You really can't? Okay. Thank you anyway. The woman who was organizing the whole gala, the chair of the foundation or whatever her title was, approached Patricia. Rebecca could see them talking. The older woman's face getting stern, Patricia's getting more and more panicked. This was bad. This was the kind of thing that could get someone fired. Rebecca delivered her champagne glasses and headed back toward the kitchen. As she passed by the stage, she let herself look at the piano for just a second. Really look at it. The keys seemed to glow under the stage lights. Her heart did something complicated in her chest, a mix of longing and pain that she'd gotten very good at ignoring. In the kitchen, everyone was talking about the piano situation. Tommy thought it was kind of funny. Maybe they should just put on a Spotify playlist, he joked. Nobody laughed. You didn't put on Spotify at $1,000 a plate charity gala. Rebecca grabbed another tray and pushed back through the doors. The guests were finishing their salads now. The main course would come out soon. And after that, the silent auction would open. With or without music, it was going to happen. Patricia was going to have to tell the gala chair that they couldn't find anyone. The older woman was going to be furious, and the whole carefully planned evening was going to have an awkward silence hanging over it. Rebecca knew she should just keep working. Keep her head down, do her job, collect her paycheck at the end of the night, and go home to her tiny apartment. That's what the smart thing to do was. That's what the safe thing to do was. But as she cleared plates from table 7, as she listened to Patricia's increasingly desperate phone calls, as she walked past that beautiful piano one more time, something shifted inside her. A door she'd welded shut was starting to crack open just a tiny bit. And once a door starts to open, it's really hard to close it again. If you'd asked anyone at the Grand Meridian Hotel about Rebecca Chen, they would have told you she was a good worker, reliable, quiet, always on time. None of them knew anything real about her. She preferred it that way. It was easier to keep the past buried when nobody asked questions, but the past doesn't stay buried forever. Sometimes it sneaks up on you. Sometimes it whispers in your ear when you walk past a piano. Rebecca had grown up in a small town in Ohio, the kind of place where everyone knew and nothing much ever happened. Her mom worked at the county clerk's office during the day and cleaned houses on weekends. Just the two of them, in a rental house that always needed repairs, the landlord never got around to making. They didn't have much money, but they had each other, and for a long time that felt like enough. The piano came into their lives by accident. Or maybe it was fate. Rebecca's mom had been cleaning a house for an elderly woman named Mrs. Patterson, who was moving to a nursing home. Mrs. Patterson had a piano that her own children didn't want. It was old and out of tune and would cost more to move than it was worth. She was just going to have it hauled away. Rebecca's mom mentioned that her daughter, all of 7 years old, had been watching piano videos on YouTube on their old laptop, trying to teach herself by copying what she saw. Mrs. Patterson's face had lit up. "Bring her by," she'd said. That Saturday, Rebecca's mom brought her to Mrs. Patterson's house. The old woman sat Rebecca down at the piano and showed her where middle C was. She played a simple scale. Then she told Rebecca to try. Rebecca's small fingers found the keys and something just clicked. It felt right. It felt like coming home to a place she'd never been before. Mrs. Patterson gave them the piano. Just like that. She even paid to have it moved to their little rental house. Rebecca's mom cried, which made Rebecca cry too, even though she didn't fully understand why this was such a big deal yet. That piano became the center of Rebecca's world. She'd rush home from school every day and head straight for it. Her mom would find her there hours later, so absorbed in playing that she hadn't heard her mom calling her for dinner. The neighbors complained sometimes about the noise, but mostly they were amazed. This little girl teaching herself to play, getting better and better every single day. By the time Rebecca was 10, her mom had scraped together enough money for actual lessons. Mrs. Chen worked extra hours, picked up extra houses to clean, saved every penny she could. The piano teacher, Mr. Kowalski, took one look at Rebecca's hands, listened to her play for 5 minutes, and told her mom that her daughter had real talent. Not just good, real talent. The kind that doesn't come along very often. The lessons became the most important part of Rebecca's life. She practiced 4, 5, 6 hours a day. While other kids were playing outside or watching TV, she was at the piano. She didn't mind. She loved it. The piano was her best friend, her escape, her whole world. When she played, nothing else mattered. Not the kids at school who made fun of her cheap clothes. Not the fact that they didn't have a car and her mom had to take the bus everywhere. None of it mattered when her fingers were on those keys. Mr. Kowalski started entering her in competitions. Local ones at first. She won. Then regional competitions. She won those too. By the time she was 14, she was winning state-level competitions. People were starting to notice. This girl from nowhere with no money, no connections, just pure talent and endless hours of practice. Her mom was so proud. She'd come to every performance, sitting in the audience in her best dress, the one she wore to church, her eyes shining with tears every time Rebecca played. She'd tell everyone at work about her daughter. She had photos on her desk. She'd show them to anyone who'd look. "That's my Rebecca," she'd say. "She's going to be someone someday." The letter from Juilliard came during Rebecca's junior year of high school. The pre-college division, one of the most prestigious music programs in the world. They'd heard about her through one of the competitions. They wanted her to audition. Mr. Kowalski had actually shouted with joy when Rebecca told him. Her mom had cried for an hour straight. Getting to New York for the audition took every extra penny they had, plus some money borrowed from Mrs. Chen's sister. But they made it happen. Rebecca was terrified and excited all at once. The building was huge and intimidating. The other kids, auditioning, looked so confident, so polished in their expensive clothes with their professional-looking parents. Rebecca played Chopin. She played Rachmaninoff. She played a piece she'd composed herself, something that came from deep in her heart, about small-town dreams and a mother's love. When she finished, the panel of judges was silent for a moment. Then they smiled. The acceptance letter came 6 weeks later, full scholarship. They wanted her. Juilliard wanted her. A girl from a tiny town in Ohio, whose piano had been a hand-me-down, who'd learned from YouTube videos, and a retired teacher who charged what he knew her mom could afford. She was going to Juilliard. They celebrated with ice cream sundaes, the fancy kind from the good ice cream place in town. Her mom took a photo of Rebecca holding the acceptance letter, both of them grinning so wide their faces hurt. That photo ended up in a frame on the piano, where Rebecca could see it every time she practiced. Her future was bright. Everything was perfect. Everything was finally coming together. And then, at the end of Rebecca's senior year of high school, right before graduation, her mom got sick. At first it seemed like just a bad cold. Then it got worse. The doctor visit started, then the tests, then more tests. Then the appointment where the doctor's face was serious and he used words like stage 3 and aggressive and treatment options. Cancer. Her mom had cancer, and it was bad. Really bad. The kind where the doctors talked about fighting chances and staying positive, but their eyes said something different. Everything changed overnight. Rebecca's mom needed treatment. Chemotherapy. Radiation. Lots of it. Even with insurance, the bills were crushing. They ate through savings in weeks. Then they started eating through credit cards. Her mom couldn't work anymore. She was too sick, too tired, spending half her time at the hospital. Rebecca was supposed to start at Juilliard that fall. She'd deferred for a year, told them her mother was sick, asked if she could come the following year instead. They said yes, of course, and told her they hoped her mother would recover soon. Everyone hoped her mother would recover soon, but hoping doesn't pay bills. Hoping doesn't cover rent and groceries and medical costs that just kept piling up. Rebecca got a job at a diner near their house, working every hour she could. She'd finish her high school classes, then head straight to the diner, working until closing. Then she'd come home and sit with her mom, who was getting thinner and weaker every day. The piano sat quiet. Rebecca didn't have time to practice anymore. She barely had time to sleep. And when she did have a spare moment, she couldn't make herself sit at that bench. Every time she looked at the piano, she saw that photo of her and her mom with the Juilliard letter. Both of them so happy, so full of hope for a future that was never going to happen now. Her mom knew. She could see what was happening to her daughter. She'd tell Rebecca to practice, to keep her skills sharp, to not give up on her dream. But Rebecca couldn't. How could she sit there playing piano while her mom was fighting for her life? How could she think about Juilliard and concert halls when medical bills were piling up and they might lose the house? The year went by in a blur of hospital rooms and medicine schedules and work shifts that all ran together. Rebecca contacted Juilliard again. She needed another year. They were understanding, but she could hear the concern in the admissions officer's voice. They couldn't hold her spot forever. Her mom made it through that first year. The treatment was brutal, but she was fighting. Rebecca took care of her, worked at the diner, and tried not to think about the piano collecting dust in the corner of their living room. She tried not to think about other students her age, the ones who'd auditioned when she did, who were now at Juilliard, studying and performing and living the life she was supposed to have. The second year was harder. Her mom needed more treatment, different treatment, experimental stuff that insurance didn't cover. Rebecca picked up extra shifts. She worked doubles, triples when she could. She slept a few hours a night. She stopped talking to her old friends. She stopped talking to Mr. Kowalski. She stopped thinking about music at all because it hurt too much. When the letter came from Juilliard, she already knew what it would say. They couldn't hold her spot any longer. They were sorry. They understood her situation. If circumstances changed, she was welcome to reapply in the future. They wished her and her family all the best. Rebecca read the letter once, then put it in a drawer. She didn't tell her mom. Her mom had enough to worry about. That night, after her shift at the diner, Rebecca came home and looked at the piano for a long time. Then she took down the photo of her and her mom with the acceptance letter. She put it in the same drawer as the rejection letter and closed it. Her mom passed away 3 months later, on a Tuesday morning in October. Rebecca was holding her hand. Her mom's last words were, "I'm sorry." Rebecca told her there was nothing to be sorry for. But her mom said it again. "I'm sorry, baby. You should be playing piano." Then she was gone. After the funeral, after the bills, after everything, Rebecca had about $800 to her name and no idea what to do with the rest of her life. She couldn't stay in that house with that piano. She couldn't stay in that town where everyone looked at her with pity. So she packed a bag, sold what little she could, and bought a bus ticket to the city. She ended up at the Grand Meridian Hotel because they were hiring and she needed a job immediately. She was good at it. You learn to work hard when you've and working doubles at a diner while taking care of a dying parent. You learn to smile when you don't feel like smiling. You learn to be invisible when being invisible is easier than explaining your story to people who don't really want to know. 3 years had passed since then. 3 years of serving tables and clearing plates and being invisible. 3 years of walking past pianos in hotel lobbies and restaurants and pretending they were just furniture. 3 years of building walls around the part of herself that used to dream and hope and believe that music could take her somewhere. But tonight, standing in that ballroom, listening to Patricia make desperate phone calls, looking at that beautiful Steinway sitting empty on the stage, all those walls she'd built started to crack. Just a little. Just enough to let in a tiny sliver of light from the past, from the girl she used to be, from the dream she'd buried with her mother. Her hands were shaking slightly as she set down her tray. This was crazy. This was stupid. She should just keep working. Mind her own business, let them figure out their piano problem. That was the safe thing. The smart thing. But when had she ever chosen safe over what her heart was telling her to do? Rebecca stood near the kitchen doors, her tray pressed against her hip, watching Patricia spiral into full panic mode. The coordinator had gone through what must have been 20 phone calls by now. Her perfectly styled hair was starting to come loose from its bun. Her lipstick was smudged where she'd been biting her lip. This was a disaster, at least by fancy gala standards. The chair of the foundation, a woman named Mrs. Whitmore who wore pearls that probably cost more than a car, walked over to Patricia with the kind of expression that makes employees update their resumes. She was in her 60s, silver hair perfectly styled, wearing a navy gown that screamed old money. Rebecca had served her table earlier. She was the type who expected perfection and had no patience for excuses. Rebecca couldn't hear their conversation from where she stood, but she could read the body language. Mrs. Whitmore was not happy. Patricia was explaining, gesturing, probably listing all the people she'd called. Mrs. Whitmore's face remained stern. She said something sharp. Patricia nodded quickly, looking like she might cry. The silent auction was supposed to start in 25 minutes. Rebecca knew the timeline because they'd all been briefed earlier. Guests would finish their main course, then they'd open the doors to the adjoining room where all the auction items were displayed. People would wander through with their wine glasses, browsing million-dollar paintings and vacation packages to private islands, and there was supposed to be beautiful piano music floating through both rooms, creating an atmosphere of elegance and culture. Without the music, it would just be awkward silence and whispered conversations. It would feel empty, wrong. And at an event where people paid $1,000 a plate, where they were trying to raise money for arts education, having no music felt almost insulting. Tommy came up beside Rebecca carrying a tray of dirty dishes. "This is wild," he whispered. "Patricia's gonna get fired if she can't figure this out." Rebecca didn't respond. Her heart was beating too fast. Her palms were sweaty. There was a voice in her head getting louder, saying something she didn't want to hear, telling her to do something crazy, telling her that she could fix this, but that was insane. She hadn't played in 3 years. 3 years. Her fingers probably wouldn't even remember what to do. And even if they did, she couldn't just walk up there and play in front of 300 rich people. She was a waitress. She was invisible. That's how it was supposed to be, except she wasn't really just a waitress, was she? She used to be someone else. Someone who could make a piano sing. Someone who'd won competitions and gotten into Juilliard. That person was still in there somewhere, buried under 3 years of grief and survival mode and pretending that music didn't matter anymore. "I need to take my break," Rebecca heard herself say to Tommy. Her voice sounded strange. Far away, Tommy looked at his watch. "Now? We're about to serve dessert. I'll be quick. 5 minutes. She didn't wait for him to respond. She set down her tray on the nearest service station and walked toward where Patricia stood, now alone, her phone in her hand, staring at it like it might magically solve her problem. Rebecca's legs felt weird, like they weren't quite connected to her body. This was stupid. This was a terrible idea. She should turn around right now, go back to the kitchen, finish her shift, and forget this whole thing. But her feet kept moving forward. "Excuse me," Rebecca said quietly. Patricia looked up, her eyes distant, her mind clearly somewhere else. "What is it?" This was the moment. This was the point where Rebecca could still back out, could still say never mind, could still keep her life small and safe and uncomplicated. Her mouth felt dry. Her heart was pounding so hard she could feel it in her throat. "I can play," Rebecca said. The words came out barely above a whisper. "The piano. I can play it. Until your pianist gets here." Patricia blinked at her like she'd spoken a foreign language. "What?" "I can play piano." Rebecca's voice was stronger now, even though her hands were shaking. "I used to study. I'm not a professional anymore, but I can play background music. Classical pieces. Whatever you need." Patricia's expression cycled through confusion, disbelief, and then something that might have been desperate hope. She looked Rebecca up and down, taking in the server's uniform, the practical shoes, the hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. "You're serious?" "Yes. You can play? Like actually play? Not just chopsticks?" Something almost like a smile flickered across Rebecca's face. "I can actually play." Patricia glanced at the clock on the wall, then at Mrs. Whitmore, who was watching them from across the room, then back at Rebecca. "What kind of pieces do you know?" "Chopin, Debussy, Bach, Beethoven, Mozart. Some Rachmaninoff. Some Liszt. I can improvise too if needed." Patricia's eyes widened slightly. Those weren't just random names. Those were serious composers. You didn't just know Rachmaninoff if you'd taken a few lessons in elementary school. "Where did you study?" "I was accepted to Juilliard." Rebecca's voice caught slightly on the words. "I didn't end up going, but I studied seriously for years before that." Patricia stared at her for a long moment. Rebecca could see the calculation happening behind her eyes. This was either going to save the event or make everything worse. If Rebecca was lying, or if she wasn't any good, it would be even more embarrassing than having no music at all. But Patricia was out of options and out of time. "Okay," she said finally. "Okay, can you start right now? Can you go up there and just start playing?" Fear crashed over Rebecca like a wave. "Right now? Just go up there, sit at that piano in front of 300 people and play? After 3 years of not touching a keyboard? After 3 years of running away from music?" Her breath got shallow. Maybe this was a mistake. Maybe she couldn't actually do this. But then she thought about her mom, sitting in the audience at all those competitions, beaming with pride. Her mom, who'd worked herself to exhaustion so Rebecca could have lessons. Her mom, whose last words were about Rebecca and piano. "Your gift isn't just yours," her mom used to say. "When you have a gift, you're supposed to share it. It's selfish to keep it to yourself." "Yes," Rebecca said. "I can start now." Patricia let out a breath that was almost a sob of relief. "Thank God. Okay, let me tell Mrs. Whitmore." She paused, looking at Rebecca more closely. "What's your name?" "Rebecca. Rebecca Chen." "Rebecca, you might be saving my job right now. I don't know how to thank you." "You don't need to thank me. Just let me play." Patricia hurried off toward Mrs. Whitmore. Rebecca watched them talk, saw Mrs. Whitmore's skeptical expression, saw Patricia gesturing emphatically. Then Mrs. Whitmore looked across the room at Rebecca. Their eyes met for a second. The older woman's gaze was sharp, assessing, doubtful. Then she gave a small nod. Patricia came rushing back. "Okay, you're on. Mrs. Whitmore wants to hear you play one piece first, just to make sure. Then if it's good, you'll play through the silent auction and dinner service. The professional pianist's flight lands in 2 hours, so we only need you until then." Rebecca nodded. Her whole body was buzzing with adrenaline and terror. What had she just agreed to? "Come on," Patricia said, already walking toward the stage. Rebecca followed, very aware that people were starting to notice. Guests were looking up from their meals, curious about why a waitress was walking toward the piano with the event coordinator. She could hear the whispers starting, the confused murmurs. Tommy was staring at her from across the room with his mouth literally hanging open. The walk to the stage felt like it took forever and no time at all. Then Rebecca was climbing the 3 small steps up to the platform. The piano was right there, huge and beautiful and terrifying. The Steinway logo gleamed under the lights. The keys seemed to glow. Rebecca sat down on the bench. It felt both familiar and completely foreign. How many hours had she spent sitting on a piano bench? Thousands, tens of thousands, but not one in the last 3 years. Not since the day after her mom's funeral, when she'd played one last piece and then closed the lid and walked away. Her hands hovered over the keys. They were shaking. She took a breath, then another. The room had gone quiet. Everyone was watching now. 300 pairs of eyes on the waitress who'd claimed she could tea. They play piano. This was it. This was the moment where she'd either remember who she used to be, or completely humiliate herself in front of everyone. She thought about her mom. She thought about all those early mornings practicing before school. She thought about Mr. Kowalski telling her she had real talent. She thought about the acceptance letter from Juilliard and the dream that had died with her mom. Then Rebecca Chen placed her fingers on the keys and started to play. The first note rang out clear and pure. Then the second. Then her fingers remembered what her brain had forgotten, and suddenly the muscle memory came flooding back. She was playing Clair de Lune, Debussy's masterpiece, one of her mom's favorites. The notes flowed from her fingers like water, like breathing, like something that had been locked away and was finally free. The room went completely silent except for the piano. Not a whisper, not a clink of silverware, just the music filling every corner of the ballroom, wrapping around the crystal chandeliers and the expensive dresses and the people who'd never noticed the waitress before, but were noticing her now. Rebecca's eyes closed. She wasn't in the ballroom anymore. She was back in her living room in Ohio with her mom sitting on the couch listening, with the sun coming through the windows, with everything still simple and full of possibility. The grief she'd been carrying for 3 years poured out through her fingers, transforming into something beautiful, something transcendent. When the final note faded away, there was a moment of absolute silence. Then the applause started. Not polite golf claps. Real applause, loud. Some people were standing. Mrs. Whitmore, the stern woman with the pearls, had tears on her face. Patricia was beside the stage, her expression stunned. "That was incredible," she whispered when Rebecca stood up. "That was absolutely incredible." "Where have you been hiding?" Rebecca didn't know how to answer that. She'd been hiding in plain sight right here at this hotel for 3 years. Invisible in her server's uniform, carrying trays and refilling water glasses and pretending that the most important part of herself didn't exist. "Can you keep playing?" Patricia asked. "For the next 2 hours?" Rebecca looked at the piano, then at the room full of people who were still applauding, then at her hands which were still trembling but in a different way now. Not from fear, from something else, something that felt like waking up after a very long sleep. "Yes," she said, "I can keep playing." And just like that, everything changed. Rebecca sat back down at the piano, her heart still racing from that first piece. The applause was fading, but people were still watching her, waiting to see what would come next. She wasn't just invisible anymore. She was visible in a way she hadn't been in 3 years. And it was both terrifying and exhilarating. Patricia gave her an encouraging nod from beside the stage, then spoke into her headset to the rest of the staff. The silent auction room doors were opening. Guests would start moving between the rooms, looking at the items up for bid, and Rebecca's job was to fill the air with music. Beautiful, forgettable background music that would make everything feel sophisticated and elegant. That's what they wanted. That's what she'd agreed to give them. Rebecca started with something safe. Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major. It was a piece she'd played 1,000 times, something her fingers could navigate on autopilot. The kind of thing that's pretty but not demanding, perfect for background music while rich people decided whether to bid on a painting or a trip to Tuscany. But something weird was happening. As her fingers moved across the keys as the familiar notes filled the room, Rebecca felt something cracking open inside her chest. It was like a dam breaking or a door that had been locked for years suddenly swinging open. All the grief she'd packed away, all the dreams she'd buried, all the loss and pain and anger were right there in her hands, demanding to be let out. She finished the nocturne and moved into a prelude by Bach, clean, mathematical, structured. The kind of piece that's technically perfect but emotionally neutral, but Rebecca couldn't play it neutrally. Every note was carrying weight, carrying feeling, carrying 3 years of silence. People were moving between the rooms now, wine glasses in hand, dressed in their expensive clothes, talking in their quiet voices. But some of them had stopped moving. They were standing still, listening, really listening. Not the polite half-attention you give to background music, but actual focused attention. Rebecca moved from Bach to Mozart, then to another Chopin piece. Her fingers were remembering everything. Every competition piece, every recital, every hour of practice. It was all still there, locked away in muscle memory, just waiting for permission to come back out. She could see Tommy and the other servers working, clearing the main course plates, bringing out desserts. They kept glancing at her, their expressions somewhere between confused and amazed. Tommy caught her eye at one point and just shook his head slowly, like he couldn't believe what he was seeing. Rebecca Chen, the quiet waitress who never talked about her past, who kept to herself, who seemed content to fade into the background, was sitting at a grand piano playing like she belonged on a concert stage. Mrs. Whitmore was standing near the auction room entrance, no longer looking skeptical. She was watching Rebecca with an intensity that was almost uncomfortable. The older woman said something to the person next to her, gesturing toward the piano. That person looked too, then said something back. They were talking about her. Lots of people were talking about her. She could feel it, the energy in the room shifting, focusing. Rebecca finished Mozart and paused for just a moment, flexing her fingers. They were a little stiff, a little out of practice, but they were holding up. The question was, how long could she keep this going? Not physically. She could play for hours if she needed to. But emotionally, how long could she keep all these feelings locked down while they were trying so hard to break free? She started playing Debussy, a piece called Arabesque, light and flowing, like water. But even as she played it, something darker was building underneath. The grief was there, just below the surface. The memory of her mom in that hospital bed. The memory of making the choice to give up Juilliard. The memory of putting the piano cover down for the last time and walking away from music like it meant nothing, even though it meant everything. A man in an expensive suit was standing very close to the stage now, his phone out. At first Rebecca thought he was texting, but then she realized he was recording. Recording her, playing piano in her waitress uniform at a charity gala. Her first instinct was to stop, to tell him to put the phone away, but she couldn't stop. The music wouldn't let her stop. She finished the Debussy and moved directly into Liszt, Hungarian Rhapsody No. 2. This was a risky choice. It wasn't background music. It was showy, dramatic, demanding. The kind of piece that grabs attention and refuses to let go. But Rebecca was past caring about what she was supposed to play. Her hands wanted to play Liszt, so she played Liszt. The notes came fast and furious. Her fingers flew across the keys. This was the piece she'd played at regionals when she was 16. The one that had made the judges sit up straight in their chairs. It was technically brutal, full of rapid runs and dramatic flourishes, the kind of thing that looks impossible but feels amazing when you get it right. And Rebecca was getting it right. Maybe it wasn't perfect. Maybe there were a few notes that weren't quite as clean as they could have been. But the passion was there. The fire was there. The part of herself that she'd thought was dead was very much alive, and it was angry at being locked away for so long. More people had stopped what they were doing. The conversations were getting quieter. Even the servers had slowed down, distracted by the music. This wasn't supposed to be a performance. This was supposed to be elegant background noise. But Rebecca had turned it into something else without meaning to. She'd turned it into a statement, an announcement. A resurrection. The list ended with a flourish. Rebecca's hands were shaking. She could feel sweat on her back under the polyester uniform. Her heart was pounding. She'd just played one of the most demanding pieces in the classical repertoire after not touching a piano for 3 years, and she'd done it in front of 300 people who were now staring at her in stunned silence. Then the applause started. Louder than before. Much louder. Some people were actually putting down their wine glasses to clap properly. Mrs. Whitmore was clapping. The man with the phone was still recording, now with a huge grin on his face. Patricia appeared beside the stage again, her eyes wide. "That was amazing," she said, but she looked a little concerned too. "Maybe something a little quieter now? This is supposed to be background music for the auction." Rebecca nodded, but she couldn't quite bring herself to go back to simple nocturnes and preludes. Something had broken open inside her and it wasn't going back in its box. She started playing again, but this time she didn't choose a famous piece by a famous composer. She started improvising. This was something she used to do late at night when her mom was asleep and the house was quiet. She'd sit at the piano and just play whatever came out, creating melodies and harmonies on the spot, letting her emotions guide her fingers. She hadn't done it in 3 years. She didn't even know if she still could, but she could. The music flowed out of her like it had been waiting, building up pressure behind a dam that had finally broken. It started soft and melancholy, a musical version of grief. Then it built slowly, adding layers, adding complexity, adding anger and frustration and loss. But then gradually it started to shift. Something lighter started creeping in. Hope, maybe. Or possibility. The music was telling a story. Her story. The girl who had talent, who had dreams, who lost everything, who gave up, who forgot who she was, and who was just now in this moment, starting to remember. The room had gone completely silent. People weren't even pretending to look at the auction items anymore. They were all turned toward the stage, toward Rebecca, listening to this improvised piece that was pouring out of her like a confession, like a prayer, like a scream that had been building for 3 years and was finally being let out. She played faster, louder, her hands moving across the keys with increasing intensity. This was everything she'd felt and couldn't say. This was the night her mom died. This was the moment she realized she'd never go to Juilliard. This was every single day she'd walked past a piano and pretended she didn't care. This was the part of her soul that she'd tried to kill and failed. But then the music shifted again. It got softer, gentler. It found something that felt like acceptance, like peace. Not happy exactly, but resolved, determined. This was her deciding to live anyway. This was her getting on a bus to the city. This was her starting over. This was her surviving. And finally, at the end, the music found something that could only be called rebirth. It wasn't her old life coming back. That was gone forever. But it was a new beginning. It was this moment right now, sitting at this piano in this ballroom, remembering that even though she'd lost so much, even though the path she'd planned was gone, she was still a musician. That part of her couldn't die even when she'd tried to kill it. It was too fundamental to who she was. The final notes hung in the air for a long moment. Then silence. Complete, absolute silence. Rebecca opened her eyes and realized she was crying. Tears were running down her face, dripping onto the keys. She'd played for maybe 8 or 9 minutes straight. This improvised piece that had taken her apart and put her back together right there in front of everyone. Then the applause came. But it wasn't just applause. People were standing. All of them. 300 people in evening gowns and tuxedos, giving a standing ovation to a waitress in a polyester uniform who'd just played the most honest piece of music she'd ever created. Mrs. Whitmore was crying. The woman who'd looked so stern and skeptical earlier was openly crying, her makeup running, not even trying to hide it. The man with the phone was still recording, his own eyes suspiciously shiny. Patricia was on the stage beside her now, looking overwhelmed. "I don't even know what to say," she said. "That was the most beautiful thing I've ever heard." "Who are you?" That was the question, wasn't it? Who was Rebecca Chen? Was she the waitress who served tables and stayed invisible? Was she the prodigy who'd been accepted to Juilliard? Was she the daughter who'd given up her dreams to take care of her dying mother? Was she the woman who'd spent 3 years running from her own talent? Maybe she was all of those things. Maybe you don't stop being something just because you try to hide from it. Maybe the parts of yourself that matter most are the parts that refuse to stay buried. "I'm just someone who used to play piano," Rebecca said quietly, wiping her eyes. But that wasn't true anymore, and everyone in the room knew it. She wasn't someone who used to play piano. She was someone who played piano. Present tense. And after tonight, after this moment, she couldn't pretend otherwise. The cat was out of the bag. The door was open. Whatever happened next, there was no going back to being invisible. The professional pianist, the one who was supposed to play tonight, arrived about 20 minutes later. Patricia brought him over to meet Rebecca. His name was David something, and he looked embarrassed and apologetic about being late. "I heard you playing when I came in," he said. That improvisation was stunning. "Where do you perform usually?" "I don't," Rebecca said. "I work here. I'm a server." He looked at her like she'd spoken in a foreign language. "You're joking." "I'm not. But you're incredibly talented. You should be performing professionally." "Have you studied?" "A long time ago." "It's complicated." He looked like he wanted to ask more questions, but Patricia was pulling him away, apologizing, explaining about the delay, getting him set up at the piano. Rebecca watched him take her place on the bench, watched him start playing something technically perfect but emotionally empty, and she felt a strange sense of loss. For those 45 minutes, that piano had been hers, and now it was gone again. She found her serving tray where she'd left it and went back to work. But nothing was the same. Guests kept stopping her as she passed, telling her how beautiful her playing was, asking where she'd studied, asking where they could hear her perform again. She didn't know how to answer. She just smiled and thanked them and kept moving. Tommy cornered her in the kitchen. "What just happened out there? You never told me you could play like that. You never told me anything." "You never asked," Rebecca said, and it came out sharper than she meant it to. He looked hurt. "I'm asking now." Rebecca took a breath. "I used to study music. I was good at it. Then my mom got sick and I had to stop. That's the whole story." "That's not the whole story. Nobody plays like that without it being their whole story." He was right, of course, but Rebecca didn't have the energy to explain. Not yet, maybe not ever. She just wanted to get through the rest of the night, go home to her tiny apartment, and figure out what she'd just done to her carefully controlled, carefully small life. But as she carried trays and poured wine and cleared plates for the rest of the evening, she couldn't stop thinking about those 45 minutes at the piano, how good it had felt, how right, how much like coming home after a long time away. And she couldn't stop wondering what happened now.